Good evening. I'm Kelly Wright. Thanks for joining me as we spend the next hour together. I'm hoping that you're safe and well, taking care of yourself and your family because you do matter. My opening observations tonight, Kenosha, Wisconsin. As many of you may know, the president visited Kenosha yesterday. The question is, did he bring any healing there in the wake of Jacob Blake being shot 7 times in the back by a police officer? Now, it's been announced today that Joe Biden, the Democratic presidential contender, is actually going to visit Kenosha tomorrow. He states that he will be going there to bring healing. He disagrees with the President of the United States and believes that the President of the United States missed an opportunity to provide some healing on the streets of Kenosha. Here's how Joe Biden assesses what's going on in terms of the president addressing the issues of violence in the streets, as well as violence committed against African Americans. Listen.
First of all, I wouldn't incite violence. I'd condemn it when it occurred. I would move to, look, the vast majority of police officers are good, decent, honorable women and men. They pin on that shield every morning, and they have a right to go home that night safely. The vast majority. But just those who are not good cops, all the police I've dealt with my whole life, and I've been dealing with, I've gotten overwhelming support from law enforcement through my whole career. They're the ones that want to get rid of the bad cops even more than anybody else does, because it reflects on them, number one. Number two, I would make sure everybody understood, if I were president, that any violence, protesting is a right and free speech is a right. But to engage in violence, burning, looting, the rest, in the name of protesting is wrong. And the persons should be held accountable for their actions. And so what I'd be doing is I'd be bringing people together in the White House right now. I'd be having that police commission set up. I'd have law enforcement at the table. I'd have the community at the table. I'd have people and saying, how do we get through this? What do we do to deal with this? Because I believe the vast majority of the community at writ large, as well as law enforcement, want to straighten things out, not inflame things. But this president keeps throwing gasoline in the fire every place he goes. I noticed, I didn't watch much of it, but I watched the reports from all of you, not all of it, from the press. And, when he was asked about what should be done with regard to a young man shot in the back 7 times in front of his children, I didn't hear much of anything come from him. What should we be doing about it? And he went down the line. So I wish he'd take responsibility. As much as he'd like to be running against somebody else, he's running against me, Joe Biden. And the fact is that he is not acting very responsibly.
And yet here's President Trump talking about the police shooting of Jacob Blake, which left him paralyzed. The president never mentioned Mr. Blake by name, but answered a reporter's question about what he would say to Blake and his family.
Well, I feel terribly for anybody that goes through that. That's why I was so honored to meet the pastors. I feel terribly for anybody that goes through that. As you know, it's under investigation. It's a big thing happening right now. I guess it's under local investigation. I know, Bill, you're also participating, but it's under your local investigation group unit, and I hope they come up with the right answer. It's a complicated subject, to be honest with you.
Starting off with the program, my first guest is Dr. Howard Fuller. He is an educator. He is a civil rights activist. He's done so much, not only throughout the state of Wisconsin, but throughout the United States and globally. He brings a lot of expertise and understanding of what needs to be done to bring healing to Kenosha, to Wisconsin, and I dare say to the country. Dr. Howard Fuller, it's an honor to have you on the show today, sir.
It's good to see you again, man. I'm really glad we connected. So thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
It is a delight to have you, and it's good to get reacquainted and reconnected. But under these circumstances that are so dire, and under these circumstances when the President of the United States goes to Kenosha, did he leave any healing or any balm for healing, I should say, in Kenosha?
Well, first of all, Donald Trump is not interested in healing anything. Donald Trump is interested in Donald Trump. He's interested in getting reelected. And he's made a decision that the best way for him to get reelected is to drill down on the divisions that exist in America. And I think he believes that his pathway to victory is to continue to make those divisions real. And so there is no healing balm nowhere in this man's being. So there's nothing that he did in Kenosha that's going to help any healing as far as I can see.
For right now, in the here and now, what side or what has to be done, I should say, to heal Kenosha, especially when you have what took place with Jacob Blake being shot in the back 7 times. And then in addition to that, a 17-year-old from outside of your community travels to Kenosha, and he's a supporter of President Trump, and he opens fire on 2 protesters, or 3 protesters, killing 2 and injuring 1. At least he allegedly did that. Since I wasn't there, I don't know the full extent of everything, but that will be brought up later in a court of law. But the president didn't really denounce the actions. He said that it might have been in self-defense. So how did that strike you?
It struck me as the same man who said what he said about Charlottesville. It struck me as the same man who went to Puerto Rico and took some paper towels and shot it over to people like it was a basketball. So what I'm saying is, I don't see why anybody should be surprised by anything that Donald Trump does. The one thing that he's been is consistently standing on the side of a certain point of view in this country. And anybody who expects him to do any different is, in my opinion, not dealing with reality.
Let me take a break. And when we come back from the break, let's talk more about how your efforts to educate and help people get stronger and better in the Black community, how does that weigh in with the facts of what's happened with coronavirus, what's happened since the shooting of Jacob Blake and George Floyd and so many others? Talking to Dr. Howard Fuller. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to the program. So I'm honored to have Dr. Howard Fuller on the program today. And of course, he is from Milwaukee, and that's where he really blazed the trail in terms of his education. Before we get into what your assessment of where we are today in Kenosha and other cities throughout this country, give people a little bit of your background, if you will, because it's quite extensive. Civil rights leader and all the great things that you've done to help Black Americans.
Yeah, well, I've been very fortunate in my life, Keller, to work with a lot of really great people. And so, as you know, I've been involved in education for about the past 25 to 30 years, focused primarily on K through 12, served as a superintendent of Milwaukee Public Schools from 91 to 95. But as you know, I've been most involved in supporting parent choice around this country, trying to make sure that low-income and working-class parents have some of the choices that those of us with money have when it comes to dealing with our children's lives. But I have been involved in a lot of different things in my lifetime. The time that I spent in Durham, North Carolina, for example, as a union organizer, which people might find to be kind of strange, but I really was the business agent for Local 77, which was a union of maids and janitors at Duke University, and a man named Oliver Harvey, who was a great mentor of mine, who stood up in the 1940s to demand that maids and janitors be respected at Duke University. So I've been involved on that side of the ledger. I helped start Malcolm X Liberation University. I spent 30 days with a guerrilla column in Mozambique. And so, I've had a lot of, I guess you would call it, interesting life experiences. But the link to all of them, in my view, was trying to make sure that Black people gain greater control over their lives. I believe that Black people were liberated from slavery, but we were never free. And so I believe that this quest for freedom is still going on every single day in this country. And as Derek Bell said, we're dealing with the fact that racism in this country is not something that's tangential to the American experience. It's built into the fabric of American society. And so every day I get up to try to fight against that reality.
Sir, I appreciate you taking the time out to be on this program. Let's talk again. I want the world to see all the great work that you've done throughout your life. And are you proud of the young people with the way they're leading the cause with peaceful protests, not the agitators and not people from both sides who are trying to cause disruption? But what say you about the young people there who are really striving to make a difference?
Yeah, I'm really grateful, and having been one of those people at one point in my life, I understand how difficult what it is they're doing, and trying to like maintain a sense of calm in a certain sense, a sense of quote nonviolence. But I think the thing that bothers me the most is that when violence occurs, all of a sudden we spend all the time talking about that.
Right.
And we don't talk about, well, what is it that made that happen? It's like the police chief, I think the one from Kenosha, I think it was, or I'm trying to remember because I'm getting all of these people mixed up, who took a position, yeah, it was the dude from Kenosha, who took a position that if people had not been out there past curfew, they wouldn't have gotten killed.
Right.
Which to me was like sort of unbelievable, right? So let me turn this around on that police chief and say, if y'all had not shot Jacob Blake in the back 7 times, people would not have been there. How about that?
How about that? It's the truth. Dr. Howard Fuller, I appreciate you, sir. So much respect for you and all that you've put on the line for helping Black Americans. And when we get you back on, hopefully sometime next week, we can talk more about all the great work that you've been involved in. And you have a book out now. The name of the book is?
No Struggle, No Progress. Came out in 2014. It's a memoir, and I'm really happy I finally was able to get it all done. So yeah, so it's out there, and it's been a good experience going around the country talking to people about the book.
Well, we need to hear more about that. I remember how much of a labor of love that was for you.
Yeah. Lisa Fraser Page is the one who collaborated with me to write the book. So we were really happy when we got it done. So
I'm grateful for you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much for connecting again, Kelly.
All right. God bless you.
All right. You too.
We're back with more after this. Welcome back to the program. So the other elephant in the room is COVID-19. And how is this president responding to the coronavirus? Well, his supporters are saying that he's doing a remarkable job. And of course, those who are on the outside looking in who do not support his response are stating he's caused too much distancing between himself and his own scientists on his team. Joining me now is Dr. Yolanda Hancock. She is a pediatrician and also a member of the Milken Institute on Public Health at the George Washington University here in the nation's capital. And, Doc, it's good to have you back on, but we're still talking about the coronavirus and the fact that we do not see it letting up at all. 6 million cases here in the United States. We lead the world in the number of cases. And now it's attributed to 180,000 plus deaths. And people are still politicizing that even. What's going on?
And I think there are a couple of issues. One, just in terms of the trust in the numbers. On both sides of the political aisle, people have a level of distrust of the CDC, either in their recommendations. As we have been made aware just a week ago, the CDC changed their testing recommendations. We went from risk factor-based testing, and then in April, May, everyone could get a test without the need for symptoms or risk factors. The CDC, as of last week, said if you are asymptomatic, you don't necessarily need a test, which is frustrating for us as public health professionals and physicians when we know that 40% of people with COVID-19 are either asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic, meaning we haven't yet given them time to develop symptoms. And 50% of transmission of COVID-19 is from asymptomatic patients. So when you tell the population that if you are exposed but don't have symptoms, you don't need to get tested, you end up resulting in increasing the numbers again and causing more confusion when we know the numbers tell us a completely different story.
And it's the tone that's coming from this administration. But look, let's look at the facts. You said it's costing lives, and it is. And what would have happened if we took this approach during Ebola or HIV/AIDS or
Right.
tuberculosis? I'm bringing these issues up because that lets our viewers know that we have all had to work together to fight a menace to all societies and all cultures and all countries. And that is, we were able to fight Ebola and HIV/AIDS and get it under control. And now here we are facing this in an isolated way, doing it all alone. This is not the time for that, is it?
Absolutely not. I mean, the numbers speak for themselves. One, COVID-19 does not respect country borders. So although we may be successful with a vaccine, that still does not preclude other countries from impacting our health outcomes and vice versa. What we have seen over and over again in this country is this individualism, whether it be individual citizens and their attitudes towards wearing masks and implementing social distancing, or from the federal administration standpoint in terms of how they are vilifying the WHO and making it seem that somehow it is not in our best interest to participate in this partnership. When they defunded the WHO about a month ago, it barely made the news, but it speaks volumes to the priorities of this administration when it comes to public health.
Dr. Hancock, isn't the real villain in all of this the coronavirus itself and not the people?
I think the villain is the approach to it. The COVID-19 is what it is. We're going to come across infectious organisms all the time. As you mentioned, Ebola, SARS, MERS, etc. It's our collective response to COVID-19 that facilitates large-scale infection, large-scale death, and huge impact on our economy. When you look at a country like New Zealand, who offers wide-scale testing without a need for symptom referral or any of those things, they shut it down the minute one case shows up. People work collectively together to do contact tracing. They provide an excellent example of how we are our own heroes. Unfortunately, we have not yet seen a collective hero step up in the United States in order to effectively tackle this pandemic.
As a professional and as a public health doctor, if we had taken care of this in the early stages of this by locking down, telling everyone to wear a mask, making it a mandate, and I know that goes against the grain of this rugged individualism, and people are still up in arms about it. But if we had done that, where would this virus be right now?
I think we would be right there with Hong Kong and Taiwan and New Zealand, where our children are back in school safely, our economy has recovered, and we're going back to some form of normalcy. I think that's what we end up seeing. Instead, we see over 6 million cases and close to 200,000 individuals having lost their lives.
And you've done some work with the Johns Hopkins University, and they're the ones tallying all of this. And certainly they've been right to their predictions as well as you, Doc. When we return, I want to talk about the fact that it is now, coronavirus is now rising in the number of our children. We'll talk about that when we get back. We're talking to Dr. Yolanda Hancock. Back with more after this. And welcome back to the program. I'm talking to Dr. Elandra Hancock about the spread of coronavirus and what we can do to mitigate it. It seems like it's a Herculean task because we're always debating with each other about the appropriate way of tackling this dreaded menace to our society that's causing death and destruction for a lot of people and disruption in their economy. And now we're talking about children. You're a pediatrician, Doc, and we're seeing a rise in children. We've talked about this before. The president insisted on seeing that schools reopen. I asked him that question. I said, can't we do this virtually? He said, no, we've got to have students back in. And he went on to state that they don't get affected by it the way we do. Yet we're seeing now that schools are open, it is rising.
Absolutely. And it's not to be unexpected. We know that when children return on campus, they are at higher risk. In the same way that we were under stay-at-home orders, so were the children back in March. And we really would not have known the impact that COVID-19 would have on our children until they returned to school. What we have to pay attention to in the decision about returning to school are metrics. It's basic numbers, right? It's looking at the positivity rate in the area in which the school is located. It's looking at the daily average number of new cases per 100,000 residents. What we want to do in the positivity percentage is 5% of your test being positive, no more than that. And in terms of new cases, no more than 75 new cases per 100,000. There are states that have achieved that, and their students are returning safely. Is there a case of COVID here and there in those school districts? Absolutely. That's to be expected with any infectious disease. But when you ignore the numbers and still push for schools to reopen, we're going to continue to see children impacted. We're going to continue to see teachers impacted. We have to think about the fact that at least a third of the teaching population is over the age of 50.
Mm, 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 mm. And the flu season's coming as well.
Absolutely. And we don't know what the combination of flu and COVID looks like for our children when we know that children are disproportionately impacted by influenza. We have to do it in a scientific, evidence-based, data-driven way.
Let me bring up Iowa because they lead the country now in the number of cases. And of course, Iowa has a lot of meat packing locales, and they were under trouble several weeks ago, if not a couple of months ago. And the governor there has doubled down, saying no one needs to wear a mask. She's only done it in about 6 particular localities or municipalities. Even the White House Coronavirus Task Force has warned Iowa to get themselves in order, and she has refused to do this. So what's your reaction to that?
It makes me scratch my head and wonder what information is this person reading? Who are their influencers? Who are the people in their ears to talk to them about something as basic as a mask? We've talked over and over again together about the efficacy of masks, that we can decrease COVID-19 transmission by close to 80% if we all collectively wear a mask. We can save 5% of the GDP loss that's anticipated because of COVID-19 if we put on a mask. This Goldman Sachs gave that information. So if you don't agree with science, agree with economics for those major reasons, if nothing else, and clearly the loss of life and the risk of causing additional infection, especially as they're pushing for schools to open. It's a no-brainer for me, and I'd really love to know what messages are they listening to inform their decisions.
It all seems to be based upon their political affiliation, it seems. But I want to ask you, because we have not talked in a while, how dire is the COVID-19 pandemic in the Black community and the brown community?
We're still seeing disparities in terms of COVID-19 cases, particularly with our frontline workers, right? We know that 3/4 of Black and brown communities do not have the capacity to telework. They are on the front lines every day, and that translates into the risk for their children. Latinx children are 8 times more likely to have COVID-19. Black children are 5 times more likely, as are Native American children, to acquire COVID-19, and their most significant risk factor is where their parents work. And when people make decisions not to wear masks, not to implement social distancing, it's putting our heroes that show up for work every single day to put food on the tables for their family. It puts them at significant risk and their families.
And that alone should be enough reason for everybody in this country to do everything they can to protect all communities. Dr. Yolanda Hancock, thank you for joining us today, and the best of everything to you. I know you're working very hard and treating a lot of patients and helping them. Appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're back with more after this. And so joining me now to talk about President Trump's visit to Kenosha, Wisconsin is Timothy Allen Simon. He's an attorney, owner of TAS Strategies, as well as serving as the chairman of the board of directors for the California Black Chamber of Commerce, I should add. And you're a former Republican, by the way, who worked with Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger when he was in office. But Timothy, with all of your political expertise, have you ever seen anything like what we're encountering now? with President Trump and, of course, his challenger, Joe Biden, and just where do we stand?
You know, I was a young teenager in 1968, and experiencing what our country went under. Coming out of this, what was called the Summer of Love, the anti-war movement, the Democratic National Convention, and the violent demonstrations that were occurring around the country, largely in this case in the war effort or the anti-Vietnam War effort. I have not seen a scenario to the magnitude of 68 since what I'm seeing today. And I have concerns that the president's doubling down on law and order is, one, giving him the ability to deflect the fact that we're still in this pandemic and have yet to really establish a national plan or solution to come out of it, and two, the racial inequities that are causing the unrest and the demonstrations. He's avoiding that. And again, doubling down on law and order. And polling is indicating that in many key areas, it appears to be working for him at this time and narrowing the gap. So I do see this, I've never seen anything like this before, and I'm seeing it as a critical juncture in our nation.
When the president spoke last night, there at the dais was a black couple. That they were pastors of a church, and they had stated that they were the pastors of Julia Jackson, which, of course, she is the mother of Jacob Blake. And they were asked if they see a systemic problem between the police and the violence that's inflicted upon Black Americans. The president jumped in and answered the question. Maybe he didn't hear the question directed to them, but he went on to state that there's not a problem and that there are a lot of good cops out there, to which he is right. But then he did point out that there are some bad cops, and he claimed that they choke when they're in situations. To that point, though, couldn't he have gone one step further to say we're addressing it? And couldn't he have stated something to the Jacob Blake family to assure them that it's being addressed?
Well, the president is intentionally messaging to the constituency that is more concerned with law and order and what is the perceived threat to their communities than actually dealing with the issue of really badly trained and police officers who have no reason to be officers other than their desire to exert power. To put 7 bullets in the back of someone whom you're already holding their t-shirt and there's no visible weapon, there's no way you can explain that. But the president understands that for much of America, that is not their concern. Their concern is whether or not this violence, by the way, under his watch, under his presidency, whether this violence is going to spill into their communities. And that's what that's who the president is messaging to. It's a very deceptive communication, but be that as it may, it works with a large segment of the voting population.
When we come back, Timothy, I'd like to ask you more about the president's response to the coronavirus and certainly the effort that needs to be done to help people, all people, particularly Black Americans, survive and overcome financially with their businesses. Talking to Timothy Allen Simon when we return from the break. Welcome back to the program. Talking to now Timothy Allen Simon, an attorney, the owner of TAS Strategies, as well as the chairman of the board of directors for the California Black Chamber of Commerce. And, we were just talking about the president's visit to Kenosha. The larger picture is that there are people who still want to work with the administration because they realize that so much needs to be done. So regardless of the political stance, they're looking at the humanitarian aspects of dealing with people through this COVID-19 pandemic and making sure that people can get income. But now we see that Congress is stalemated. and even getting that extra stimulus package released to the American people.
Yes, partisanism has set in, and it's unfortunate. At the California Black Chamber of Commerce, we've actually have had meetings with the administration. We've also had meetings with Senator Kamala Harris, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, with what we hope would be a bipartisan focus on the economic challenges that we have in this fifth largest economy of the world that was imposed by the pandemic. You know, Arnold Schwarzenegger had a conversation with Reverend Al Sharpton this Sunday, and he mentioned the fact that he's convening at the Schwarzenegger Institute at the University of Southern California to get both sides to the table. I think that is critical, particularly in crises like we have today. You may recall that President Obama and then Senator John McCain met during the financial crises before President Obama went into office, in order to come forth with bipartisan solutions to save the nation. We are unfortunately in a high stakes presidential campaign, and I think that makes it increasingly difficult. But both sides have to understand that businesses and families are hurting because of the stalemates that are occurring in Congress. And I think there needs to be more pressure placed on Mitch McConnell, as well as the Democrats, in order to try to find common ground to refund businesses, to refund families. That, by the way, stimulates the economy. Right. We have no problem in coming together to fund war efforts, for example. We have no problems in coming together to fund space programs in the multi-billion, if not trillion of dollars. This is a war that we're in. It's a war of health, but it's also a war to bring back our economy, which is one of the characteristics that makes this nation great. So I do think that there needs to be urgency, but I also believe that we will not see a true solution until after the election in November.
Tomorrow I'll be speaking with the Secretary of HUD, Ben Carson, as well as Scott Turner, who's head of the Opportunity Zone Initiative at the White House and the Revitalization Program, as well as talking to a young African-American couple. In fact, the gentleman is an actor, and he has an Opportunity Zone operating in High Point, North Carolina. Your opinion of Opportunity Zones, and can that be a way of helping Black business owners and also helping blighted areas and low income areas?
Well, clearly, if it's attracting capital investment, capital expenditures into communities, distressed communities, particularly those expenditures or investments that are generating jobs and other vendor economic opportunities for families and businesses, I see it as a positive thing. And the structure of a tax-driven or tax incentive type of investment is clearly attractive to institutional investors, as well as individual hedge funds, private equity funds that are looking to take advantage of the legislation. I see it as a positive step. However, there also needs to be just major investment in many communities, particularly in the area of housing. There needs to be solutions for what is a housing shortage in many parts of the country, or abandoned housing that I believe creates opportunities for redevelopment and design. So I hope the Secretary, Dr. Carson, and Mr. Turner come forward with solutions that go beyond the opportunity zones, but look at opportunities that are available for businesses, and particularly African-American businesses, to revitalize distressed communities.
Timothy, thank you for that. Before I let you go, we've talked a lot about the Republicans, and we talked a lot about what the president is doing. What about the Democrats, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris? I know that you've known Kamala Harris for many, many years. What are they doing? Are they doing it right?
I think they're counterpunching now and looking at, I'm a pugilist, I think they're looking at the areas that are open in attacking the president. And I think that's important, because the president he attacks, he's a puncher, he throws punches. But also I'm seeing, solutions that are being proposed through the Democrats in Congress. And I think that is showing the public that there are solutions that could come out of a new administration. So I've been impressed with the communications that I've heard from the president and the vice president nominee, Kamala Harris. I do think that they're going to have to even become more, I don't want them to go to the level of the president in terms of his viciousness and his disregard in terms of respecting individuals with the nicknames and things that he's been known to do. But I also believe they're going to have to use basketball parlance, go hard in the paint. That this is going to be a very, very tough fight, and they're going to have to seize every opportunity possible to get their message. And that message is going to have to be the incentive to get a large voter turnout, particularly in the swing in the battleground states.
Timothy Allen Simon, thank you. Look forward to talking to you again very soon. Thank you for
you, Kelly.
Your
Be
insights.
Safe.
All right.
Okay.
We'll be back with more after this. Welcome back to the program. So let's take a break from politics right now and really focus on the family. Strengthening the family is something that's near and dear to me, and it's near and dear to my guests who are on with me all the time to talk about Family Strong, and that's George and Tondra Gregory. They are the founders of Journey for Life, as well as chaplains, NFL chaplains to the NFL team, the Los Angeles Chargers. So they join me now from wonderful California. And we're talking about tough conversations within our families and how appropriate, because we're having tough conversations outside of the home, how do we prepare for tough conversations inside the home?
Yes. And our hope is that tackling these tough conversations within the home will give us the skills to tackle tough conversations outside the home. But that's a skill that starts first in the home. And if you don't get it in the home, you can eventually get it. But it's a skill that is learned. And it's important because if we can't have tough conversations and get to the other side of them, we walk in disconnection, right? We don't have a deeper level of intimacy. So tackling these conversations are crucial for the health of our relationship, longevity of our relationship. We have to deal with tough things and we need to deal with them effectively. So that is why this is a conversation that is on our heart.
Yeah, we tell people all the time, one of the main things that happens in families and also in our country, right, as we see a multitude of things that we're having tough conversations about is it's hard to tackle conversations when you've got a lot of big issues on the table. And so sometimes it's best to try to tackle one big thing at a time, right? Don't let certain other conversations dilute the main thing, because there's so many times that if you talk about too many things, there's so many rabbit trails, there's so many things that you want to respond to that you really don't get to tackle the main thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's often times, like you said, there's a need to win, a need to be right. And when it's just the two of you, it's often the case where both of you are wrong. So now you have to find a way to find what's right. So how do you achieve that? I mean, we call it compromise, but there's also mutually assured agreement rather than mutually assured destruction.
Right. Well, that's what we call acknowledgement, right? You got to acknowledge that there's some hurt or there's things that need to be addressed. To not acknowledge those things really keeps the conversation going on in quite a rigid cycle. So acknowledgement, we find that when couples or in their families, whether it's children or parents or siblings, when they acknowledge the pain, the hurt, the mishap that has happened, then that's half the battle. When I can put my hand on my wife's shoulder and say, you know what, I understand that hurt you. And then we can empathize, right? There's moments that when we don't acknowledge that, it just keeps the cycle going of we're never going to get to the bottom of it because we don't want to acknowledge the hurt, the pain, or the issue at hand.
We could do an entire show on this, and it would be long and still sometimes not enough for some couples out there, because Sometimes people are just, so focused on having their own way or getting their message across and expressing their angry about being right. And I think what you've just talked about is so important. We've got to keep on learning from your good coaching, not only for marriages, but just relationships in general, of how to have these tough conversations and stop cutting each other up and leaving blood on the floor and
right.
hurt feelings.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yes.
Yep.
Well,
There
George
is-
and Tandra, I appreciate you always. Look forward to having you again on Friday as we continue to have this dialogue on strengthening the family, making family stronger. And to do that, it sounds to me like you both have hit the nail on the head. To make the family stronger, we've got to have these tough conversations so that those families can grow closer and then become stronger. And then carry it out to the rest of the world and say, hey, y'all, watch how we do what we do.
That's it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Love you both. Thanks for being on. George and Tanda Gregory, Journey for Life, and NFL chaplains to the Los Angeles Chargers. And if you really want to find out more about them, make sure you check them out on Saturdays on Facebook. And what time does it air, guys?
IG, we do 6:30 West Coast time and 9:30 East Coast time.
All right. I appreciate you both. Thank you.
All right.
Awesome.
God bless.
Thanks.
We're back with more after this. And we're back now. I want to thank all of the guests who appeared on tonight's program. And I especially want to thank each and every one of you who took time out to watch tonight. Certainly, you matter to me, and I appreciate your time. In closing, hopefully we've ignited, and united to keep spreading not fear, not racism or violence, but knowledge, love, freedom, and peace. Good night.
Come on, all aboard. Let me break it down for you like this. The rhythm of love is easy to find if you're listening. The color of light isn't red, black, or white, but it's crimson. We all bleed the same. If you don't feel the groove, it's alright. Just give it time, give it time. Come on, y'all. Get on board. Mankind won't survive if our hearts beat inside a hateful rhythm. You see, love isn't bought, but comes with a price of forgiveness, and we all bleed the same. Yeah. If you don't feel it now, just wait. It's coming on, the love train. Just give it time, give it time. Get on board. That means you and you on the love train. Get on board. All creeds and colors, brothers, all sisters and sisters on the love train. Get on board the love train. Everyone's invited.